In the year 2019, it is fair to say that vegan activism has settled into a few familiar grooves, a few repetitious patterns that we see again and again. There was a time, maybe just 5 years ago, when a lot of these ideas were fresh and new. There was a time when the Earthlings experience, they were the first people to put together this idea of sitting silently, wearing a mask, holding an open laptop computer, showing slaughterhouse footage. That was a new and exciting idea. I think people, including myself, first found out about on Tumblr. That was before veganism was so big on YouTube. Tumblr was where it was at for people sharing that idea. The Earthlings experience spread. Other groups knocked off and modified the idea, etc. There was a time when each of these techniques, in terms of street theater, open protest, and even digital slacktivism, such as we're engaging now, there was a time when these things were exciting or new, and that time is now in the past. So increasingly, I have people sending me sympathetic email reflecting whether they're just looking at what they've done in the last few months or in the last decade, that when they get involved in vegan activism, they feel that their time is being wasted. So the main idea I'm going to try to convey to you in this video is that to waste someone's time is actually immoral. This may not occur to us because in our intimate lives, relations between husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend, even grandparents and grandchildren, there's a sense in which we're expected to behave as if wasting time is no waste at all. That, to drive for 3 hours just so you can see your grandparents and sit around kind of doing nothing in particular for several hours and drive back. This is part of the politesse of the bourgeois class, that everyone ought to have time to waste and one ought to behave as if it is nothing. It is merely gracious to waste one's time with someone else. Well, this doesn't extend to things like politics, education, work. Really, it's a fiction. It's a fiction in our times, maybe very roughly analogous to the way in which people used to engage in animal sacrifice to welcome a guest into their homes, taking something tremendously precious and destroying it as if to prove that it's nothing. As a symbolic way of receiving a guest. Well, the sacrifices we make for one another in the 21st century are largely sacrifices of time and to a much lesser extent, sacrifices of money. Several different people wrote into me about their experience with recent protests just in the last couple of days since my most recent critiques on this issue. One of them was describing to me what it was like to drive 5 hours each way to attend a protest that he felt accomplished nothing and didn't even say anything interesting to the people attending the contest. So you're talking about driving 5 hours, stay in a hotel. This is time as well as money being spent. Attend this event, drive back. I assume he's only got one night in a hotel and not two. This is a big sacrifice. If you're talking about people who are raising kids and have a full-time job, it's a big, big sacrifice. And what do you get in return for that sacrifice? For the most part, what's going on within these familiar grooves and patterns in veganism, it's accomplishing nothing but providing one spectacle after another, one occasion after another for vegans to pat themselves in the back, for vegans to affirm their own sense of identity. Now, I'm not going to say that has zero value. Somebody asked me this question on the internet a few days ago. Someone asked me, do I really feel this kind of activism has zero value? And I said, no, I would not say zero. The value is greater than zero, but most of the value is just in giving vegans a chance to meet one another. There are lots of people who met their boyfriend and later got married at a vegan animal rights protest or at an anti-fur protest or whatever. There's a sense in which meeting other people could be the basis for more meaningful forms of activism in the future. But in most of these cases, that is the only positive thing I can say about it. The events themselves are meaningless. They're a waste of time. And the actual lectures, there's a reason why most of them don't get uploaded to YouTube. The actual content of the lectures is people standing there prompting the audience to cheer, like prompting the audience to applaud the speaker in response to the speaker telling the audience how wonderful they are. I made fun of James Aspey for this, only so many months ago. James Aspey stands there and gives a speech to vegans, and it's like, you have to realize, you people are the future. You people are saving the planet. You people are saving the animals. You're the best people in the world. The crowd goes, well, they're applauding him, applauding themselves. It's a cycle of self-praise that's going on here. Anyway, I find it deeply embarrassing, but again, above all else, it's a waste of time. What does it mean to say that there's a question of morality in wasting someone's time? several years ago, I had a chance, I think a very remote chance, to enter a master's degree and PhD program at a university in Montreal, Canada. Now, why did I gesture like this? Because I was living in Saskatchewan, Canada. And my wife and I together devoted a considerable amount of time and money to fly in an airplane from Saskatchewan to Montreal just to have what was, I think, supposed to be a 1-hour meeting with this professor. And he only talked to us for about 15 minutes. I could get into the details of that, but it was truly hurtful in that circumstance. This guy was a professor of Buddhism, and I had prepared for the meeting. I'd read his PhD thesis. I got his PhD thesis out of the light. He had not published a whole lot of research on Buddhism since then, so I went and got a copy of his PhD thesis, and I read it. And I was prepared to really talk about my own research in Buddhist philosophy and his research in Buddhist philosophy. And I show up as someone who has years and years of background in the discipline, and I get fobbed off with a kind of aimless 15-minute pep talk, and I'm told, look, you can study here if you want to. I didn't feel so upset about it at that moment. It took a little while for it to sink in, but I was really being robbed of one of the very few opportunities to get higher education I would ever have before or since. And, this was a person who had no respect for the fact, had no respect for our time, for the extent to which he was wasting our time. Also, again, hotels in Montreal are not cheap. Flights within Canada are not cheap. You're better off flying to Thailand or flying to Las Vegas than flying between any two cities in Canada. It's miserable. It's a huge waste of money. And you think, this person has no respect for my time, and in a sense, they have no respect for me as a human being. So this is a minor and yet crushing disappointment that had really serious long-term effects on my life. And, I've got to say, as detached as I may be about this experience, as low as my expectations may have been going into this meeting with this professor, it left me with a deep and lasting sense of resentment. It's possible I'll meet that guy at some point. That has happened sometimes, where I meet professors of Buddhism years later after my negative interactions with them by email. So, hey, do you want to know what impact that had on my life for the next 10, 20 years? Like, for you, this may have been a casual and flippant decision, but you know what? You make, especially with graduate students, undergraduate students too, you're casually making decisions that have huge impact on your student's life. So, the question of respect, in that case, we had an appointment. I wrote to him in advance and made the appointment, and then we booked the trip. So to disrespect somebody to that extent, to waste their time, there are real questions of morality involved, morality and immorality. And, especially with left-wing politics, the extent to which everybody left of center, not even left, everybody on the left, they get used to such hyperbolic, over-the-top, exaggerated ideological language, extreme language of praise, and also extreme language of criticism, the fulmination against the status quo, extreme language claiming that the government is totally immoral, that the economic system is totally immoral, that everything has to be resolved in some kind of crescendo, some kind of terrible uprising, revolution, and so on. This is antithetical to a more down-to-earth, pragmatic planning process where you make it clear what it is you're offering people, what it is they should expect, what use it is you're going to make of their time, and where people feel respected, people feel that what they were offered, what they were promised, is what they were really given. So whether that's that you have a conference where you tell people, look, if you come to this conference, I'm going to give you, 1 hour on stage, and you get maybe 20 minutes where you get on stage and you get to speak. I'm going to introduce you to these and these people. You're going to get to eat at a dinner, and you're going to get introduced. Like, what is it that you're offering as a vegan movement at a vegan event? Is there a certain workshop? Is there something really of practical value? Is there some educational value? Is there some training you're going to get out of attending this thing? Because people are making serious sacrifices in terms of their time and money. I know one female vegan activist, and she has 2 kids and a job, not a full-time job, part-time job, and she's raising 2 kids. And, time is precious to her, and she was kicked out of a vegan group. They exiled her because she did not meet their quota for attending a certain number of hours of street protests per month. So they wanted a commitment for, if you wanted to be inside the organization, you had to be spending whatever it was, 8 hours a month minimum or something. You had to spend a certain number of hours standing on the street at these protests. All right. So I have an email here. Sorry, this was a public comment on Facebook from a woman named Jean. I'm just going to use her first name, but I assume this is someone whose first language is English. You'll see why I mentioned that here. Jean writes in, "Hi Eisel, I hope you could give me some advice on how to move forward. I've been an activist for a few years with a few local vegan organizations and Anonymous for the Voiceless." So Anonymous for the Voiceless are one of the groups who stand around in a mask silently. "Unfortunately, none of that ever worked to an extent that was justifying the amount of time I put in it. So, upon moving to another state in Europe, I eventually quit." So those are the crucial words here. None of that ever worked to an extent that was justifying the amount of time I put into it. Preach. So she goes on to say more about her situation. She's 22 years old. Good illustrator or painter, speaks several languages, lives below the poverty line, is trying to study philosophy in her spare time. Okay, so you got no money, you've barely got a home. There's no mention here of a job. Well, let me tell you something. You in the audience may feel right now that watching this YouTube video was a waste of your time. If so, I apologize. But the level of effort, both for the creator and for the audience, that goes into watching this YouTube video, it's exponentially more efficient than showing up at a street protest or even showing up at a conference, like an academic conference, or going to see a lecture in veganism and hoping to hear something interesting or be able to speak to someone, hoping to make that connection. So, Jean, for your situation, given what you've told me, I know just one form of vegan activism that won't waste your time, that'll bring some positive people into your life, where you can use your artistic talent if you're good at illustrating, if you're good at making images. I only know one option I can recommend to you that you can do in poverty from your tiny apartment where you're living below the poverty line. Doesn't require that you own a car, doesn't require that you drive 5 hours each day. I only know one option, and it's right here on YouTube. So, look, guys, there was a book years ago called Weapons of the Weak. Terrible book written by a communist asshole. I don't want to talk about it. It was a hit book, Weapons of the Weak. And we have this phrase still in the English language, complete garbage in terms of political science and anthropology. But let me tell you something. In the 21st century, right now, standing on the street chanting slogans, These are not the weapons of the weak. Handing out pamphlets, no. Options like YouTube, these really are effective weapons of the weak. And hey, I have a lot to complain about YouTube. I'm really actively considering quitting forever right now because my life has come to such a bad closure, to be quite frank. It's been one tragedy after another for me, personally, professionally, educationally, otherwise. I'll make more videos talking about that. But the good news is, if you take the time to make something beautiful, something interesting, something thought-provoking here on YouTube, it lasts forever. It stays up, whether you think of it as a work of art or as something closer to having a conversation with someone in a cafe. If you want to have conversations with a whole bunch of strangers, try to spread the message of veganism, keep in mind, I've had more than 3.5 million conversations now, more than 3.5 million total views or total viewings on this channel. There's no way I could have accomplished that standing on a street corner, holding a placard, chanting slowly. There's no way I could have accomplished that wearing a mask or participating in these other forms of protest. And for you, maybe, just maybe, you'll be luckier than I was, because I come out of this veganism thing burnt and broken. But maybe you'll be one of the lucky ones. So my advice to you is, be virtuous, but be lucky.